Hello. This edition of Reformasi Dispatch podcast was recorded on Thursday, 17 March at 11 a.m. Things may have changed by the time you hear this. Enjoy the show.
Welcome back to Reformasi Dispatch. I'm Jeff Hutton, regional correspondent at Straits Times of Singapore.
Kevin O'Rourke, writer of the Reformasi Weekly Report on Indonesian politics and policymaking since 2003. We interviewed Marina Berg, ambassador of Sweden to Indonesia, on sustainability.
Lovely. I love putting difficult questions to ambassadors and watch them parry and dodge with great elan. Simply because she has no right to be talking about policy of policy decisions of her government. But interesting thoughts there about the war in Ukraine, and a real worry. And sorry?
She handled the questions very well, even though we were talking about the biggest issues imaginable, as well as electric buses in Jakarta.
But in a way that was well crafted and positioned and informed, and didn't add to problems. This is the way that I would probably answer them. Anyway, I love diplomats. They always seem to know the right thing to say. And she also made a very troubling point that the war in Eastern Europe is pushing other really big existential threats off the agenda, namely climate change.
Right. Yeah. The second UN report on climate change came out very recently and was drowned basically by all the news about the invasion of Ukraine. So, and the report had some very harrowing conclusions.
Well, it was a great interview. But before that, we got a little bit of a discussion. And we want to start off with Constitution. There is would you say, a fair chance that Jokowis would be willing to serve a third term, or might indeed serve a third term?
He is amenable to it, clearly, yes, because he has at least provided a reassurance that he will abide by the Constitution. But he has very conspicuously refrained from opposing the amendment of the Constitution in a way that would allow him to both abide by the Constitution and stay on as president. That's what three parties aim to do: Golkar, PKB, and PAN. And the goal has endorsement from two coordinating ministers. First, Erlangga Hartarto, the economics coordinating minister, but also more recently, Luhut Panjaitan. And Panjaitan has twice gone on the record advocating this. And most recently, just yesterday, he said, quote unquote, "Why should Jokowis step down? What reason is there for him to step down?"
I could think of a couple really good.
You named three earlier: Constitution.
Yeah. No, but what I wanted to ask was, okay, I just wanted to push back on the whole topic of Jokowis potentially wanting to serve a third term. I mean, this seems like a natural thing for a guy in his position who has mastered the job. He is sky high popularity. He's been in the public eye since 2005. And he must think at some point he is the father of the nation. So if the people would rather that he serves a third term, what's the problem with that?
That's an obnoxious view, Jeff. You're a tyrant. You're a typical Canadian dictator.
FDR, I think. Well, in Canada, there's no term limits. In Britain, there's no term limits. And they've gone well. No problems there.
Right.
What is the problem with, I mean, why are term limits so sacrosanct that the very mention of that he was playing fast and loose with them, not playing to the letter of the law, is causing conniption fits.
Well, Suharto, for one, the memories of the presidency that went on for 32 years, well past
Oh,
its
that.
fruitfulness, um, and all the injustice that surrounded that, and the fact that Indonesia's democratization is still at an early stage. It's been over 20 years, of course, but throughout the 8 years so far of the Widodo era, there has not been a lot of progress made in the institutionalization of democratization. So things are still flimsy and fragile and vulnerable. So the idea of postponing for whatever reason, for however long, just creates a precedent or shakes the system in a way that's very unnerving. And then the other point is that the Widodo is popular precisely because he is a symbol of democracy. So as soon as he uh, bursts that image, then his popularity will diminish a lot. Uh, Credible polling shows that overwhelming majorities oppose any delay to the 2024 national election by a margin of about 2 or almost 3 people to 1. So 70% oppose it, about 20 to 25% support it, and the rest are undecided. So Penjaitan is claiming that over 100 million Indonesians want elections postponed based on big data from social media users, which is just absolutely ludicrous. And it's disinformation. As an example of a senior minister, somebody who should know better and who should act responsibly, deliberately attempting to stupefy the public for their own personal ends and agendas with a very blinkered approach. This whole thing just shows a very narrow mindset among the proponents of postponement, who are failing to link the benefits of democracy with the benefits for the economy in terms of stability and the ability of power to change hands peacefully well into the future over the long term, rather than having a periodic succession crisis when the authoritarian ruler reaches the end of his natural lifespan, which is what happens in authoritarian regimes, which is what happened in Indonesia in 1998, which involves convulsions and setbacks. And so, yeah, fortunately, I don't think the plan's going to go ahead. So
Now, why is that? There's a constitutional mechanism that sets a pretty high bar, and that bar is nowhere near being surpassed, right? And interestingly, it's the guardians of democracy themselves, Prabowo and Megawati, who are standing athwart this march toward no more term limits.
that's right. Yeah, basically the proponents of postponement, who want to amend the Constitution to either allow for a third term or, more likely, increase the interval of elections from 5 years to 7 years, starting now, thereby giving Widodo an extra 2 years, have support from 3 parties, as I mentioned, Golkar, PKB, and PAN, and they would need to have 2/3 of the MPR, the combined legislature, in order to surpass the quorum, in order to initiate an amendment. And right now, they're only at about 28%. So, yeah, but they would likely get a portion of the DPD, which is the upper house. And so basically, they could do it if they were to get all of the DPD. Should be tough, but not impossible. It would be expensive.
Yeah, a lot of favors.
And the entirety of those 2 parties you mentioned, Megawati's PDIP, the biggest party, and Prabowo's Gerindra. Now, what's interesting is that figures from both PDIP and Gerindra have said over and over that their parties are opposed to it and that their party chairs are opposed to it. But neither of the party chairs have said themselves that they are opposed to it. So there's been sort of a awkward vacuum from Megawati and Prabowo themselves. So that's them hedging their bets a little bit, and that's what's a little bit disconcerting, and that's why this issue still hasn't died after 2 full weeks.
That strikes me as a little bit Javanese, though, right? You are not going to come out and
Yeah.
say no to
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
Yeah, I've put a lot of thought into this, far too much thought into this. And one thing that I think is that basically their concern is that they don't want to be outside in the political wilderness. And if Widodo clings to the presidency one way or another, then the worst case scenario for Megawati and Prabowo is to be in the opposition. So if Widodo is going to keep the presidency, then they want to be in the presidency with him rather than being the object of his vindication. So that's why they're
starting
not
a podcast or something, having to go.
Well, it wouldn't be that bad.
That's okay. 28% support, and you need a supermajority of some sort. Why are we worried then about this as anything more than a distant risk?
Right. Yeah. Well, initially the worry that I had 2 weeks ago was that it looked as if Widodo was going to actually resort to extra constitutional methods to stay in power, because there was a furor about the positions of these three parties, including those of Hartarto, the head of Golkar, the coordinating economics minister, who carries a lot of weight. And Widodo seemed to stay silent, even through a point in time where events clearly dictated that he make a comment. And that was specifically on the afternoon of 4 March, a Friday. And I was publishing my Reformasta Weekly newsletter, and I kept refreshing the news wires, waiting for some comment from the palace, because I was sure there had to be one, and there wasn't. And so the absence of a comment was very ominous. And so it turns out he did make a comment, but he made it to Kompas, and Kompas waited for about 15 hours before they released it to the public, which was at 5 a.m. on 5 March, Saturday morning. So by that time, so anyway, basically there was the reassuring statement from him that he would abide by the Constitution. So then it became more an issue of, well, are the parties going to have the ability to get over this 2/3 quorum threshold in the Constitution to initiate an amendment? And that it is conceivably possible. It's with the DPD, with PPP, Gorndra, and possibly even peeling away another party that has signaled opposition but is a pro-Widodo party. That's Surya Palo's Nasdem. Surya Palo has been very strong about opposing postponement, but worst case scenario, maybe he would switch sides. So basically, if all you have is the two opposition parties, Party Democrat and PKS, opposing it, then the amendment would likely go through. And then what you're looking at then is domestic political instability, because this is what Widodo's aides are not calculating, is the intensity of the resistance, the animosity that would come from student groups and civil society and the general public.
Yeah. Well, also, the president's job is to uphold the institution of democracy. And in this case, be very clear that you will be leaving the presidential palace on the assigned day, no matter what. And there is a greater good. It's so that the next guy doesn't have as much wiggle room to stick around and enjoy the VIP jet. He's setting a precedent, and we're having the conversation at a time when, Ukraine is seeing its democracy squelched by Russia. Indonesia was supposed to be the good news story, and they're playing games with a really important development. It's sad, it's unnecessary, and potentially dangerous.
Yeah, disconcerting, because basically there's this polarization in the world between rival alignments of systems, with an alliance that consists predominantly, not entirely, but predominantly of liberal democracies on one side, and then Putin and a small handful of allies, Belarus, North Korea, Eritrea on the other. And then there's countries in the middle that are wavering, chiefly China. Their spokesman for the foreign ministry, Zhao Lijiang, has said repeatedly that the U.S. appears to be involved in making biological weapons in Ukraine, spouting Russian disinformation. So that calls into question how China will align, and that's a complicated question. But precisely,
how much of a dick is this guy? Sorry, the guy's a dick. What a fucking dick. Sorry. Spokespeople for foreign ministries should not be dicks. He is. Sorry, that's we'll come up with a grab quote for that for this episode.
Yeah, I mean, the foreign ministry spokesperson is arguably being a foil. So he's arguably because in the grand scheme of things, he's pretty low on the totem pole because the Chinese state is very top heavy with senior officials. So if you really want to have a statement from somebody with a lot of power, there's a lot of others. Yeah. So
he's somebody who terminology there. A foil. I said
foil.
dick.
Yeah, he's a foil. Yeah, because he's the person that puts out. Yeah. Just like the like the fencing team of Holden Caulfield in Catcher in the Rye. You know what I mean?
Jesus Christ. Anyway, whole thing could go away if Jokowis said a few words that would make it fairly clear that he has other plans. Part of me is not really surprised. He's kind of liking the job. He's pretty good at it. And he's got big infrastructure projects that I think he would like to see finished or well on their way. But do you also think it's a case of he doesn't want Prabowo to get it? Assuming that he wants to stay on.
I don't know. That's a good question. That's part of the factor. It's certainly the thinking for Luhut, because Luhut and Prabowo have been enemies since the 1980s, early 1980s. So that's definitely a major driver in Luhut's mind, undoubtedly. Some of these other figures also have their own personal reasons for that matter. Hartarto needs to fear a post-Widodo era because he lacks his own power base beyond the president within Golkar. And the same holds true for the PKB chair, Muhammad Iskandar. But Widodo himself, I think he underappreciates democracy and those types of principles. And therefore, he's amenable to a workaround whereby he uses his strength in Parliament to rewrite the Constitution to allow him to continue doing such good in his mind.
It's interesting. I found myself nodding in agreement when you said that he is not a strong advocate for democracy, or doesn't really clearly see its utility. I mean, you said it 2 minutes ago, and I forgot what exactly you said. And he was elected as the guy who was the dyed-in-the-wool Democrat. He was the big Democratic hope. And now he can just deal it. It's a sad state of affairs.
Yeah, it was always clear at the outset of his career that he was somebody who's very humble, and he won direct election. And so therefore it appeared that he was a true Democrat. But in fact, he was just somebody who was very humble who won direct election. He wasn't necessarily a Democrat at heart. He's definitely humble. I mean, his lifestyle and the way he carries himself is humble. He's not supercilious, and he's not doesn't look down on people.
And a big part of his popularity.
Yeah. But at the same time, he's not somebody who's campaigning and fighting for the abstract principle of democracy. Yeah.
As we all know, Indonesia is hosting it has the presidency of the G20. Quite a year to have it, given that two of the big members, Russia Ukraine, the United States, a whole bunch of NATO countries. That is going to be quite the G20 meeting. Do you think that Indonesia has fully grasped the nettle of that they would need to, I mean, not rise to the moment, but reconsider what this talking shop is meant to accomplish at this moment? And whether or not these trends that are emerging of having to choose sides might just jettison the whole effort. I mean, why would you allow Russia and China, who are so clearly authoritarian, into a forum that gives them international sway? No, they're killing Ukrainians. We're not going to go, says Scott Morrison. He's got his hands full.
Right. Yeah. No. It's to answer your question. No, the Indonesian foreign policy establishment and the country's positioning is not working right now. They're not doing the job. They're not grasping the gravity of the situation, and they're assuming a passive stance, which is doomed to failure. It's going to cause the G20 to collapse and just not happen. There will be no G20 summit at this rate.
Oh, you think really? You think
unless Indonesia becomes proactive and starts to contribute to a solution instead of just being a bystander, and tries and becomes more realistic about what's going to be feasible and infeasible. Right now, the idea is that Indonesia can just be a bystander, not be involved, remain non-aligned, and practice non-interference, and meanwhile host a congenial summit of all G20 nations where Indonesia stays above the fray, and that's not going to happen. Either, yeah. So Indonesia needs to be on the side of liberal democracies and the vast majority of UN states which have condemned the war in Ukraine, as Indonesia did. It was on the right side of the UN resolution, but Widodo's statements have still been soft, and there hasn't been any real contribution to diplomacy or solutions. And China is wavering as well, which is another factor that Indonesia can influence if it wanted to make the effort and stand on principle.
I suppose the fact that Myanmar remains in ASEAN gives you an idea of the tolerance for bad behaving members of a talking shop. What could the G20 do? What are some of the options that a creative president of the G20 would be able to muster? What might they do?
I think a petition of heads of state of countries of the global south would cause China to pay attention, because China's future is contingent on them being able to access resources from the global south, countries of
Africa,
Latin America,
for example,
Africa,
right?
and Southeast Asia. Yeah,
right.
And Indonesia is one of the most important ones, but it's not alone. There's a lot of others. So Indonesia alone can't do it, but an alliance can do it, because, and it could be important because it would not be a U.S.-led or an EU-led alliance. It would be a genuinely a genuine alliance from the global south. Widodo is ideally situated to lead that as the head of the biggest country in ASEAN, the head of the world's fourth largest country, the third largest democracy, and the first largest Islamic country. So, and host of the G20. But instead, he's making tepid statements. and spectating.
Surely because Indonesia is non-aligned and shouldn't be taking sides.
Yeah, that's one thing. Also, there's a big influential kind of segment of the cognoscenti in Jakarta who see international affairs with a lot of attention paid to Palestine and the predicament of the Palestinians and the oppression suffered by Israel against the Palestinians. And so their reaction is to equate the suffering of the Ukrainians with the suffering of the Palestinians, and then to draw contrasts between the international response for Ukraine versus the international support for Palestine. So that's what's happening, and it's obviously possible to assess and the merits of that perspective, but that is something that's affecting the viewpoint. Yeah, and then just a lack of understanding and familiarity with Ukraine and with the history of the Soviet Union and the validity of the various claims on either side. I think there's also a fear of being on the wrong side of Russia, although that one is kind of perplexing because Indonesia really doesn't rely on Russia for much at all, except some potential oil and gas investment, which was probably never going to happen anyway, plus support for its 16
any year now. There's going to be any year now.
Yeah.
The two bond. Yeah, Russia, that's a bit perplexing. China, however, pretty clear. And China has of late been getting closer to its client, i.e. Russia.
Right. Well, yeah. That one's really interesting. What's going through the mind of China, because these sanctions against Russia are precisely what China fears for itself one day. So basically, like I was writing in,
if it attacks Taiwan.
Yeah. Or for whatever reason, I think that China sees the way that the international community is confronting Russia with unison, galvanized as a foreboding of what might happen to China in the future, and therefore there's a real reluctance to join that alliance. There's a sort of, I think, a logic that they need to hang together with Russia, or else they'll hang separately sooner or later. So. But on the other hand, China literally cannot afford to bear the brunt of economic sanctions like those being imposed on Russia, because there'll be a global depression for one thing, but China's economy really would collapse. China is completely dependent on its export engine for its prosperity and its power, so it can't sacrifice that. So China's really in a bind, and its leadership is not handling the situation very well at all either. So. Everything's up in the air.
And the spokesman's a dick.
Well, a foil, but yeah.
We're going to leave it there. Thanks so much. Coming up after the break, Ambassador Berg.
Hello, Ambassador Marina Berg. Thank you so much for joining us. It's great to be with you here today.
Thank you, Kevin and Jeffrey.
Can I start just with why don't you provide us, please, with a framework about Sweden's approach to climate change and sustainability in Indonesia? You're known as an ambassador who takes sustainability very seriously and focuses on it very intently, and I wish you could share that with us just for starters.
Thank you, Kevin. I will be happy to. And first of all, then more properly, thank you, Jeffrey and Kevin, for having me. I really look forward to the discussions. Yes, so let me start. And it's quite, in these very gloomy and devastating days, I still think that we must focus intensively and more so on the ongoing climate change that makes us all so vulnerable now and definitely in the future. No matter where we live or where we are, we experience the climate change and the effects. But the good thing, I want to be positive as well. The good thing is that we can do something about the climate crisis. And every step we take to reduce our emissions mitigates the negative impact on societies and the ecosystems. And as such, climate, as you rightly said, Kevin, is high on the Swedish government's agenda and a very high priority. So let me start by sharing with you then the Swedish perspective on climate and how to tackle the issues. Sweden has adopted something that we call climate concept, a broad-based approach to adhere to the challenges. The concept is divided into 3 areas: policy dialogue, financing, and business promotion. These areas are implemented on a national level within the framework of our EU work and also in multilateral fora. In also our international bilateral cooperations and relations. So on the policy side, let me just inform you that the Swedish Parliament decided in 2017 already to introduce a climate policy framework, a climate law, the Climate Act, that will help us to implement all the agreement, the Paris Agreement, and the goals within the Paris Agreement. It aims to have 0 net emissions of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere and to make Sweden the world's first fossil-free welfare state by 2045. Being a member of EU, I also want to mention that the EU aims to be climate neutral by 2050. And this goes hand in hand with the European Green Deal, as you are well aware of. At the center of any policy, however, let alone climate policy, is the question of money. The big question is always, how will we be able to finance the policy measures being implemented? That is then being the second part and the second area of the Swedish climate concept. And it's absolutely the starting point that countries themselves have a plan for how their national contribution to the Paris Agreement will be financed. And also what I'm actually talking about is the so-called national determined contribution, NDCs, and I know you have raised that issue on your podcast before. It's absolutely important that each plan include the country's own opportunities to generate funding and ownership of their own development. However, with that said, most of the funding required needs to come from private sectors and private actors. Public funds can only provide part of the funding. To mobilize private capital is absolutely crucial. In addition, we are well aware that companies and the private sector need economic incentives to combat climate change. Policy measures such as carbon dioxide taxation is, for instance, very important. And this brings me into the third area of our Swedish climate concept, business promotion. Collaboration between the state, the business, academia, and the civil society is absolutely central in many areas that we work. And that goes also for achieving the goal of the Paris Agreement. Companies, not only the Swedish ones, are well placed to participate in and to contribute to the green transition, I'm sure, and to ensure states around the world to meet the targets. We realize that companies need incentives to be climate smart, and one is undoubtedly the increasing number of people that demand green products. And I'm so happy to see more and more companies around the world are working in accordance with the Paris Agreement. There is a momentum. We have seen from the Swedish example that climate investments make economic sense. In the past, you know also that it was widely believed that to tackle climate change was at odds with economic growth. But the financial and business cases is very clear that clean energy are stronger than ever. In most countries, going solar, for instance, is now cheaper than building new coal power plants. And this is also the case in Indonesia. To this end, the Swedish case is clear, as I said. And what I mean is that greener is making you richer. Although Sweden's carbon tax is the highest in the world, for instance, Swedish companies can maintain their competitiveness in international markets and are often at the forefront of efforts to tackle climate change. Yes, and of course, I can't not talk about all this without mentioning COVID-19 and the pandemic and its effects. On the one hand, it provides us, of course, the opportunity to create a more sustainable and a more resilient society, to build back better, as Indonesians friends are saying, and the government in Indonesia says. Green transition will definitely, should and will definitely constitute a starting point for Sweden, and it should also do that for Indonesia and other countries. But having said that, I am well aware that across the world, COVID-19 has hit the economic growth and tax revenue, making it harder for every government, particularly the developing countries, of course, to meet the targets on cutting carbon emissions and adapting to the climate change. At the same time, tackle climate change cannot wait. Thank you very much.
Indeed, hear, hear. Thank you. All right. Well, yeah, at this moment in time, with the pandemic still ongoing in its second year, albeit tapering somewhat, perhaps, but also now warfare happening in Europe with Russia's invasion of the Ukraine. What are the outlooks for fighting climate change in your view?
The outlook for fighting climate change, it has, as I said, it has already started, and we cannot lose momentum. That's my first intuitive answer to your question. But the most important thing I want to send to you, a message that I really want to send to you as well, is that to tackle the climate issues, we have to work together. It's a global challenge and it has to be resolved jointly. And thanks to the Paris Agreement, the world is now working together to reduce emission. But having said that, we continuously need to find the best ways of how to do it and to share knowledge and experience and know-how, technology. It must be the core of our work in order to succeed. And the international community has to be supportive, must be supportive. And Sweden is, for instance, one of the countries that contributes the most to per capita to international climate finance. But I also know that, we need to support the developing countries even more now than before the pandemic in order to reach the goals of the Paris Agreement.
I'd like to ask a question, Ambassador. That leads in nicely to what I wanted to ask you, was that President Widodo has made it clear that he would be open to speeding up Indonesia's reduction of CO2 levels if there was help coming from abroad. In fact, he sort of insisted that it really is up to rich countries to help poor countries to make this transition. What's your view on that? And what sort of help might countries like Sweden offer in the event that you agree with the president?
I definitely agree with the president that rich countries have to help supporting developing countries when it comes to combating the climate change. But as I also said, every country has to do its own part as much as possible. From the Swedish perspective, I can only share what we are doing together with Indonesia. And although, the climate change has to be tackled together, we do have to share competences, experiences, etc. And with Indonesia, Sweden experienced an excellent relations excellent relation already, and we continue to expand that and deepen it through our bilateral cooperation by promoting business opportunities in several sectors, including renewable energy, climate environment, smart transportation, and blue economy. My mission here in Indonesia is to increase Swedish investments for the benefit for both our countries. And we have created a special platform, our annual Sweden-Indonesia Sustainability Partnership. We call it SISP, that strengthen and deepen our joint efforts to achieve the UN Sustainable Development Goals until 2030. And through this platform, we have managed to draw the attention not only from Swedish companies and the private sector in Sweden, but also from Swedish expertise in form of expert agencies that have committed to work with Indonesia. And I can give you 2 examples. For instance, Swedfund, which is the Development Financing Institute of the Swedish government, has committed to provide financial support for the preparatory technical advisory aimed at supporting the transition to the vision of a full electrification of the public transportation fleets in Jakarta by 2030. So that's one example. The second example is that that also has come through our SISP platform, is that we have managed to extract interest from the Swedish Agency for Marine and Water Management to collaborate with Indonesia on blue economy. This is a very early stage, but still something to grab onto.
Blue economy, hydrogen fuel?
Sorry,
I was wondering if you could explain to the listener what blue economy might be.
Oh, what blue economy is? Well, this is the broadest concept I've ever experienced. So there is always an area within the blue economy where you can find potentials for further develop the cooperation between our countries. That's my conclusion from that. Blue economy can be water management, but it can also be air, related to the air in relation to the coastal areas. So it's everything within it. And Indonesia put a lot of efforts into the blue economy right now. And I really, I mean, they have given us a list of things that they really want to do. Everything from cleaning the oceans and actually airspace. So everything is possible within blue economy, I must say.
Yeah, in the blue economy in Indonesia, I think there's a lot of opportunity for ecotourism and marine areas, which can feed into coral reef conservation and sustainable fisheries.
Oh, sustainable ocean management in general, definitely. And as you say, ecotourism is also one thing. But it's all about low waste economic, low emission and low waste paradigm close to the ocean. Yeah. And
Well,
as I said, I mean, it's all about sharing experiences and competences and knowledge, and to make sure that the companies from Sweden that are dealing with these issues are able to invest for the benefit of both our countries.
So, when you approach this in Indonesia, do you need to pick and choose, as you mentioned, where your competencies lie and your compatibilities or complementarities? Or is it best to focus on the biggest source of emissions, coal-fired power plants, for example? How do you see that in your mind? How do you approach that?
My mission here, as I said, is to increase the Swedish investments, and it's demand-driven, to be honest. So we cannot just pick and choose. But we have decided to focus on the areas I mentioned because we are a small mission here. We have a Swedish embassy and we have Business Sweden. And so we have decided to focus on renewable energy, smart transportation specifically. And when it comes to the field of energy, we also have a MOU, a Memorandum of Understanding with Indonesia, which is definitely boosting our common efforts to smart and green sustainable energy markets. And within that area, we have the Swedish Energy Agency, working closely with Business Sweden here in Indonesia. And that has been very successful for a couple of years already, actually. But we are focusing on, a limited number of areas. We cannot grasp for everything, but still the bottom line is that it's demand driven.
I'd like to follow up on that if I could, Ambassador. It's completely understandable. You've got to pick and choose your battles. I'm sure Indonesia isn't Sweden's biggest mission in the world. Be that as it may, you'd have to. I'm sure you would have a view about how the sort of the challenges and hurdles your country's companies are facing. If you had a chance to have the ear of the investment coordinating board or the finance minister or Pak Luhut, what requests, what favors, what observations or compliments might you offer in order to facilitate investment? What are some of the hurdles that your companies face, and how might things be changed in order to facilitate investment?
For us, open and free trade is the only way forward to economic growth, and also to be able to ensure green transition. Open and free trade on that platform was the way Sweden once developed. In order to actually exchange information, to exchange competences, to make sure that we can support Indonesia to 100% in its green transition, we need to have open and free trade. As simple as that. At the same time, I do understand we need to have regulations, and each country can definitely has its own regulation, but to make it as little difficult as possible for companies to invest in countries is the way to succeed.
Can you cite some sectors of the economy that seem relatively more promising at the moment for Sweden or for other international partners engaging with Indonesia?
I would say that Sweden has for hundreds of years been quite successful in Indonesia, and you know as well as I do that Ericsson, the Swedish company Ericsson, has been here for more than 110 years, I think almost 113 years already. We have been quite successful when it comes to the digitalization, definitely. So that is one area. Another area where we have been successful already is in energy sector, definitely. Energy transition lately. And also, of course, you know the big companies, the Swedish big companies, IKEA and H&M. Still, if you are here and wanting to stay in Indonesia, you have a great future ahead of you. So we have been successful in many sectors already.
Ambassador Berg, if you don't mind me transitioning just to keep things topical in the interview here, the Ukraine has suffered the invasion of Russia, and I tend to wonder whether this is going to help or hurt climate efforts. On the one hand, there's a galvanization of international cooperation and unity right now on one hand, but of course, on the other hand, there's polarization and distraction and open warfare. How does this look to you, and how does this look from the perspective of Sweden right now, sitting precariously one country away from Russia?
Well, Kevin, this is a very worrisome time we are living in, definitely. Let me just start by saying that the Russian aggression and unprovoked military attack against Ukraine, the flagrant violation of international law, has put Sweden and the rest of the world into a very difficult situation. That is for sure. But never before have we seen the EU so united. Never before have we seen EU so united with the Western world all together. And also we have friendly countries around us here in this region. And so I'm actually very happy to see the formation of like-minded countries in this specific situation and on this specific war situation in Ukraine. And to be honest, one more thing on that, words do matter. What is happening now in Ukraine is not a crisis, not two parties that need to de-escalate. It is war, aggression from one party, in other words, Russia, that bears solely the responsibility for its act of aggression and for the human suffering, definitely, that follow. But having said that, I'm well aware that what we started to talk about, the battle of the climate change, it has definitely come into a shadow as so many other aspects and issues that we are dealing with globally. It has definitely come into a situation. For instance, let me take one example. On the 28th of February, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, as IPCC, launched its second report on impact, adaptation, and vulnerability due to the climate change. Has it been discussed? Not really. And once again, that report shows that not enough is being done. It shows how brutal and serious the climate situation is. And this report was indeed released in the shadow of the war in Ukraine. And at a point of time, world really needed to mobilize and to tackle the climate change. It's really sad. But of course, I mean, the security situation and threat in Europe and globally needs to be handled as well. So definitely it has a correlation.
Well, certainly Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the war and the escalating violence there is no doubt sparking conversation in Sweden about your country's way forward. But I wondered if there's a silver lining to be had. Might this give new impetus toward renewable sources of energy? We have for so long basically mortgaged our future to authoritarian regimes. Russia is not the only purveyor of crude oil and gas that is non-democratic. There's Saudi Arabia as well, Venezuela. Do you think that maybe there might be a growing consensus that enough is enough, that there are alternatives, and that it's not an alternative, but it's actually the safe way forward, not only for the environment, but to undercut authoritarian regimes like Putin's Russia?
This will, of course, be a bit speculating a little bit, but still, you're right that every challenge we face also comes with opportunities. And what we see here now in the world is that more and more countries stop importing oil and gas from Russia, which means that we need to find energy from something else, right? So we have an opportunity now to accelerate, of course, our energy emissions and definitely to see how we can be more fossil free in the future. The technique is there, and we know that.
Yeah.
And so it's definitely up to us, right? Countries and governments. And yes, there is an opportunity now to accelerate improving the techniques for a fossil-free future.
Yeah, a terrible cost, but there is definitely more reason than ever.
Definitely.
Yes. Yeah.
But one line that I always use is that the future is fossil-free, right? And the winners will be those who lead the climate transition. So we are ready to join hands and with Indonesia and to do more when it comes to increase Swedish investments here. The techniques and competences are there.
Excellent.
Well, on that note, Ambassador, thank you so much for joining us. It's a real treat and privilege to be speaking with you on such a busy time.
Thank you very much, Jeffrey and Kevin. It's been an honor.
Okay, yeah, we look forward to talking to you again.
Thanks so much to Ambassador Marina Berg of Sweden for joining us. Our editing and sound engineering is done by Stephen Handoko. Our music is courtesy of the Blue Dot Sessions. For a free trial of Kevin's Reformasi weekly newsletter, go to reformasi.info. And if you're listening to us through a podcast app, please subscribe and share us on social media. It would be a huge help. As always, you can reach us by email at hello@onthelevel.id. This podcast is a production of On the Level Media. I'm Jeff Hutton. Bye for now.